NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is at the UN. Ned Price is a former senior State Department and CIA official, and Jonathan Capehart is co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend. So, Ned, look, the president of the United States stood up in front of world leaders and said the U.S. is basically pointless. Criticism of the UN is not new. Let's say that. But help us wrap our minds around the way he said it and where he said it.
No, you're right, Chris. Criticism of the UN is not new. It's also, by the way, not unwarranted in some respects. But what we saw today, let's not pretend it was a foreign policy speech or dignify it by calling it one. This was, I think, best described as MAGA Mad Libs. What I mean by that is Trump was basically speaking to his political base. He was hitting each and just about every one of his favorite topics from the campaign trail. He was speaking to a domestic political audience, even though if in the physical sense, he was addressing the world leaders before him, most of whom probably would have preferred to be just about anywhere else. Imagine how the delegate from East Timor or Chad or any other country imagine what they would have been thinking as the president was going on his greatest hits: grocery prices, stock market highs, as he said, the southern border, even the crime levels in D.C. Everything the president does just about is in some ways domestic partisan combat, even if it's sometimes cloaked in the guise of something else. And today we just happened to hear a campaign speech that could have been given in 2020 or 2024 that was given in Turtle Bay in front of world leaders.
Yeah, I think questioning why the UN even exists, Vaughn, brought on some targeted words for particular countries as well on the issue of immigration, which is one of his favorite topics. Tell us more about that part.
Right, Chris, and this comes at a time in which, of course, the U.S. under the Trump administration has shuttered USAID, cut humanitarian and international aid, and has cut funding by more than $500 million to the United Nations. And the president, well, he touted domestically the immigration crackdown underway inside of the U.S.'s mainland borders. He also touted the fact that they have effectively been able to cut the number of migrants coming into the United States. He put his attention on the call for nativism, not just in the U.S., but for other countries to do more to stop the surge of migration into their own borders, suggesting that, in the case of America, America belongs to the American people. And he says, with migration comes different customs, religions, and everything, and they should be sent home immediately. He went on to say that other countries have to solve their own problems, and allowing migrants to leave their home countries and go to other countries shouldn't be those other countries' problems. He said, I quote, "I'm really good at this stuff," referring to his handling of immigration in the urging of other countries to take this on. In the case of London, where he was just last week, he called their mayor terrible for his immigration policies. He said that Germany had been on a sick path. I want to let you listen to just a little bit of an example of some of his remarks on this. Take a listen.
It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell. In Asia, they dump much of their garbage right into the ocean. And over about a 1 week and 2 week journey, it flows right past Los Angeles. You've seen it. Massive amounts of garbage.
And just a few moments ago, right before the president headed in for a behind-closed-door meeting with the United Nations Secretary General, he posted on his Truth Social account saying, quote, "I believe the speech was very well received. It focused very much on energy and immigration. I've been talking about this for a long period of time, and this forum was the absolute best from the standpoint of making these two important statements. I hope everybody gets to watch. The teleprompter was broken, and the escalator came to a sudden halt as we were riding up to the podium, but both of those events probably made the speech more interesting than it would have been otherwise." The president will also be meeting, Chris, with the heads of the EU, as well as a separate meeting with Argentinian President Milei, as well as a one-on-one bilateral meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine. Chris.
I think he might have just dissed his speechwriters, but that's probably the least of it. Jonathan, There were also multiple instances where the president went off on tangents, and those tangents involved grievances that had nothing to do with foreign policy. Take a listen.
All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen. But she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter.
We have that actual video. This is the moment, I don't know if you can see it, Jonathan, of when they got on the escalator and it stopped. And then they turn and look.
President Trump, why did you
I guess, put that into context for us, how often Trump seems to find grievance wherever and whatever happens.
Chris, it's part of his DNA. He's like that friend you go to dinner with, and they always find fault with something, with either the menu, the table, the chairs, the wait staff, the lighting, whatever. What's so embarrassing about the president's speech before the UN today is that that was the place where presidents of the United States in either party would use that platform as a way of setting the table, setting the agenda for the globe. We are the leader of the free world. This is the way we see things. These are our values. This is the problems that need to be solved. And here's how America is going to go about trying to solve them with the help of everyone in that room, with the international community. And what we have gotten from President Trump every time he has gone to that iconic podium is a person who brings his domestic campaign speech and gives it to the world. The world does not care about his grievances, picayune grievances here in the United States. You remember during his first campaign for president, people talked about how his campaign and the way he went about it and the people who loved him for it, it was like they were giving a big middle finger to the establishment. And what we saw today with the president's speech at the UN was him once again giving a big middle finger to the global order, a global order the United States helped create and bolstered and protected for the past 80 years. So, I am not surprised the president did what he did. What I am surprised by is that the nations, the leaders of the world, still show up to listen to what he has to say. And I wonder now if they show up because it's the sort of the global equivalent of going to a stand-up comedy show.
Well, Ned, there were multiple occasions when Donald Trump took credit. It wasn't grievances. He took credit for things, though, that he actually didn't have anything to do with. I'm talking, for example, about clean air. In fact, clean air is due to the very regulations that he has tried to gut. But let me play a couple of instances of what he had to say about his environmental policy.
If we had the most clean air, and I think we do, we have very clean air. We have the cleanest air we've had in many, many years. But the problem is that other countries, like China, which has air that's a little bit rough, it blows. And no matter what you're doing down here, the air up here tends to get very dirty because it comes in from other countries where their air isn't so clean. And the environmentalists refuse to acknowledge that. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. Climate change, no matter what happens, you're involved in that. No more global warming, no more global cooling. All of these predictions made by the United Nations and many others, often for bad reasons, were wrong.
Global warming, he said, Ned, was the greatest con job ever by stupid people. It's Climate Week. There are a lot of people gathered in New York City as well to talk about these issues. How do you think this is being received? Does it roll off their shoulders? They've heard this before from Donald Trump. Or does it set about a series of meetings? Like, what do you do to move this forward when clearly the United States is not part of this equation?
Yeah, Chris, listening to those excerpts, there was some real poetry in that speech. I'm not sure it was intentional by any means. Look, I think this is far different from what world leaders, even in that very chamber, heard and saw from Donald Trump during his first term in office. This is so very detached from the reality in which we are all living. And to use, I think, the well-trod metaphor, Donald Trump tries to fancy himself the world's firefighter, and in so many ways, he's the arsonist. You yourself raised the issue of environmental regulations in the United States, contributing to what President Trump was lamenting about in that clip. Let me give you another picayune example, to use Jonathan's word. When he was on that escalator, and the escalator stopped, well, I imagine one of the reasons that escalator stopped is because his administration has withheld hundreds of millions of dollars in funding over his first term in office and during the first 8 months or so of his current term to the UN. And the UN itself is falling apart. And on that very score, Chris, I just had to take note that the area in his speech where he came across with the most passion and the most fervor was talking about the contract that Trump companies missed out on some 20 years ago to refurbish the UN. We knew this speech was going to be something when President Trump apparently sent his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor out to do morning television, where Marco Rubio also railed against the United Nations for not choosing the Trump companies to do this work some 20 years ago. To the extent there was any policy in this speech, it was nonsensical. If you can make any sense about what he was saying, what he was laying out that the United States would do vis-a-vis Israel's war against Hamas or Russia's war against Ukraine, I couldn't decipher it. And I think many leaders in that chamber, to the extent they weren't laughing, they were scratching their heads.
Well, today, for every one of the 57 minutes that Donald Trump spoke to the General Assembly of the United Nations, desperately pretending to be the smartest person in the room, by insulting the entire world and insulting the intelligence of most Americans, Donald Trump was condemning himself to history with his own statements that historians will be using against him for the rest of time.
I'm telling you that if you don't get away from the green energy scam, your country is going to fail.
Future historians will have an easy time convicting Donald Trump of out-of-control ignorance and incompetence simply by quoting Donald Trump saying things like that. And today, every representative of every country listening to Donald Trump knew that Donald Trump is covering up and preventing the release of the Epstein files that he promised to release and his attorney general promised to release, and they have now refused to release. Possibly because Donald Trump's name appears in the Epstein files too many times. And today at the United Nations, thanks to reporting by MSNBC this weekend, every representative of every country listening to Donald Trump knew that while Donald Trump was shaming himself at that microphone, he was also covering up the Homan files. Donald Trump is now the only president in history who decided to appoint someone to a job in his administration after that person had been recorded on video by the FBI accepting $50,000 in cash. The New York Times has now backed up MSNBC's reporting, with the Times confirming all of the same facts, first revealed by MSNBC's Carol Leonnig and Ken Dilanian in an investigative report that has now shocked the entire Trump administration into abject silence. It has been more than 24 hours now since anyone in the Trump administration has dared to say a single word about the $50,000 that Donald Trump's so-called border czar, a job invented by Donald Trump that does not require Senate confirmation, Tom Homan accepted on videotape from FBI agents last September who were posing as businessmen eager to get government contracts related to border security. At the time, Tom Homan was running a consulting business, advising companies on how to get government contracts related to border security. So everyone at the United Nations today knew that they were listening to the only American president in history who has someone on the government payroll who he now knows, thanks to MSNBC, if he didn't know before, was caught on video by the FBI accepting $50,000 in cash before Donald Trump gave him his job in the federal government. And everyone at the United Nations listening to Donald Trump try to insult them knew that they were listening to a man who cannot even pronounce the name of the medicine that he has decided to give medical advice about.
Effective immediately, the FDA will be notifying physicians that the use of well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen. Is that okay? Which is basically commonly known as Tylenol.
Is that okay? No, it's not okay when a clownish man who cannot even pronounce the name of the medicine he tries to give you advice about tells you not to take that medicine. Unfortunately, too many Americans will suffer by making the mistake of following Donald Trump's medical advice and the advice of Donald Trump's Secretary of Health and Human Services, the most dangerous American Nepo baby in American history, Robert Kennedy Jr., who insists that his own admitted 14-year addiction to heroin is over, while his even more dangerous addiction to public attention remains incurable. Democrats in the House and Senate are now calling for the release of the Homan files, in addition to the Epstein files. Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee, led by Congressman Jamie Raskin, have demanded in writing that the Attorney General and FBI Director hand over the Homan files. The Democrats wrote, "Do the Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Investigation have video and audio recordings of White House border czar Tom Homan accepting $50,000 in cash bribes from undercover FBI agents stuffed in a brown paper takeout bag from the restaurant chain Cava? It certainly sounds like you do. Your reported effort to shut down this investigation appears to be a brazen cover-up to protect Donald Trump's allies at a time when the Department of Justice and FBI are also being ordered to aggressively pursue prosecution of Donald Trump's political enemies. We demand that both of you immediately turn over all recordings from Mr. Homan's meeting, as well as all files from this investigation of purported bribery involving Mr. Homan. This is an untenable situation." And today, Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee also demanded the same material. The Senate Democrats said, "We are initiating a robust oversight inquiry to review Mr. Homan's actions prior to and since joining this administration, as well as the FBI's role in ultimately shutting down the investigation into Mr. Homan. Closing this investigation is an unprecedented departure from FBI's longstanding role in combating public corruption. These allegations raise additional concerns that this administration's immigration, enforcement, and deportation policies and actions, including its award of federal funds for detention centers or security-related technology, have been and may continue to be influenced by Mr. Homan's corrupt financial interests." Yesterday, the White House press secretary apparently inadvertently admitted that Tom Homan was in a meeting with undercover FBI agents. She made that admission yesterday when she got carried away in saying something that no one else has said. She claimed Mr. Homan never took the $50,000.
Did the president ask the Justice Department to close the case, and does Holman have to return the $50,000?
Well, Mr. Holman never took the $50,000 that you're referring to, so you should get your facts straight, number one. Number two, this was another example of the weaponization of the Biden Department of Justice against one of President Trump's strongest and most vocal supporters in the midst of a presidential campaign. You had FBI agents going undercover to try and entrap one of the president's top allies and supporters, someone who they knew very well would be taking a government position months later. Mr. Holman did absolutely nothing wrong.
So first of all, who told her that Mr. Holman's never took the $50,000? Who told her that? Was it Mr. Holman's? He has not dared to say that himself, and no one else has dared to say that. But what you saw there, in her frenzied attempt to claim that Tom Homan never took the $50,000, she actually just said, quote, "You had FBI agents going undercover to try and entrap one of the president's top allies and supporters," end quote. So there you have the president's press secretary admitting that Tom Homan was in a meeting with undercover FBI agents. That's the White House confirming at least that fact. That's the White House officially confirming that Tom Homan was in a meeting with undercover FBI agents. And last night, in a comical attempt to put out this fire, Tom Homan appeared on the Fox propaganda channel where the interviewer forgot to ask him, "Were you in a meeting with undercover FBI agents?" And she forgot to ask him, "Did you take $50,000 in cash?"
Tom, I want to give you a chance to address this article that came out over the weekend, and it was on our always reliable MSNBC, and they said that you took $50,000 in cash in a bag from an undercover FBI agent to help them win government contracts in Trump's second term. The DOJ said they concluded there was no criminal wrongdoing, but nevertheless, that story is out there, and I imagine you want to respond to that.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I did nothing criminal. I did nothing illegal. And it's hit piece after hit piece after hit piece. And I'm glad the FBI and DOJ came out and said, said that nothing illegal happened and nothing, no criminal activity. You're talking about a guy who spent 34 years enforcing the law. I mean, I left a very successful business that I ran to come back and work for a government again. I'm back on a government paycheck. Not only did I sacrifice my family sacrifices, I make sacrifices every day. I got more death threats than anybody. I got a security team around me, but guess what? My kids don't. My wife don't. I mean, I haven't lived with my wife in months because I don't want her to be here right now with all the threats. So after all the sacrifices, after serving my nation for all these years, they want to come out and dirty me up. And it's not going to end. There's a hit piece on me every 2 weeks. But keep coming, because you know what? Tom Homan isn't going anywhere. Tom Homan isn't shutting up. And Tom Homan's going to keep doing what he's doing, because working with President Trump's the greatest honor of my life. We're making this country safer again every day, and we're going to keep doing it.
So Tom Homan says he isn't shutting up, but the other thing he isn't doing is disputing a single fact reported by MSNBC in that investigative report. Tom Homan has not disputed a single thing reported by MSNBC in that investigative report. What you just heard is the entirety of what Tom Homan has said about MSNBC's reporting. And I wanted you to hear the entirety of it, including all the irrelevant junk that he threw in there that has nothing to do with the evidence that's reported in that investigative report. So you could hear what he did not say. And as I pointed out last night, Tom Homan there did not deny taking the $50,000 in cash. And that is a distinction that has been picked up in the New York Times coverage of the story and most other news reports covering this story today, that Tom Homan has not denied taking the $50,000 in cash. And that leaves only the White House press secretary saying that, yes, Tom Homan was in a meeting with undercover FBI agents. You heard her admit that. But she says he did not take the cash. Tom Homan himself is not daring to say whether he was in that meeting or whether he took the cash. Because Tom Homan knows if there is video in the FBI files of him doing that. Remember, Tom Homan knows. So he's very careful about what he says and doesn't say. And Donald Trump saying absolutely nothing about it, nothing, absolute silence, nothing about it. But he's doing everything he can to create as many fireworks displays as he can around different news centers to divert attention away from what are now the two stories Donald Trump is trying to run away from this year, the Epstein files and now the new Homan files. We already have an idea of what that kind of FBI sting video looks like. It has been 46 years since FBI undercover agents caught federal officials on videotape accepting $50,000 in cash, which is apparently the FBI's favorite number for undercover payoffs to politicians. That FBI operation in 1979 was codenamed Abscam. It involved undercover FBI agents posing as Arab businessmen trying to bribe members of Congress and local officials in New Jersey. Writer-director David O. Russell's film American Hustle, starring Bradley Cooper with an assist from Robert De Niro and Christian Bale, tells the fictionalized story of Abscam. Everyone watching TV news in America in 1980 saw exactly what it was like when FBI undercover agents hand over $50,000 in cash. Sometimes they need a bigger envelope.
Let me just say this to you. You're going about it the right way. Okay. I'm going to tell you something real simple and short. Money talks in this business and bullshit talks. It works the same way down in Washington.
Later in the tape, the FBI agent handed Myers an envelope which contained $50,000.
And as long as I got your guarantee that... You got my guarantee and no problems at all with me. You got my guarantee. And
I got your guarantee. I don't need your guarantee.
Let's go, buddy.
Yeah. I know. Let me, wait, I got a big envelope. I'll put it in another envelope.
I think might be wise, while they're doing, usually I get things back to me on some court stuff that we can, four of us can read back in Philly. Spend it well.
One United States senator and 6 members of the House of Representatives were convicted of bribery and conspiracy. No criminal defendants have been able to convince juries they are not guilty after the juries have seen FBI videotape of the defendants taking cash from undercover FBI agents. Donald Trump knows, and Tom Homan knows, that Tom Homan cannot possibly survive this story if the FBI videotape of his meeting with undercover FBI agents becomes public.
Even by the already impossibly degraded standards, the last 48 hours of Donald Trump's pronouncements have been disturbing and dangerous. It started yesterday during a bizarre address about autism, Tylenol, and vaccines.
Effective immediately, the FDA will be notifying physicians that the use of well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen. Is that okay? Which is basically commonly known as Tylenol, during pregnancy can be associated with a very increased risk of autism. We want no mercury in the vaccine. We want no aluminum in the vaccine. The MMR, I think, should be taken separately. This is based on what I feel, the mumps, measles, and all the three should be taken separately. Don't let them pump your baby up with the largest pile of stuff you've ever seen in your life going into the delicate little body of a baby.
This was all nonsense, and that's the most charitable word I could use. I mean, vaccines do not cause autism. This has been established at peer review after peer review after peer review over decades. It's been studied. There is no established link between Tylenol and autism either. Certainly not the very elevated risk he talked about. But Trump didn't stop there. He absolutely flew off the rails during his speech at the UN today. Admittedly, the day got off to a bad start.
The President and the First Lady, Dana, have just walked in right on time, I would say. Right on cue.
Yeah, they're a couple of minutes ahead of schedule, and, you know, we love that punctuality.
Yes.
And the First Lady also going to address the UN as well as she arrives with her husband, and they go up the escalator this time.
So I heard a few questions being shouted there, but no responses. Stand by. I don't know if there's audio on that or not.
Chuck Schumer.
Okay, I heard the end. That was Chuck Schumer, and there's a reason for that.
Slight escalator mishap. For what it's worth, the UN official told the AP that Trump's own party was responsible for Escalator Gate. That did not stop the president from grousing about it and many other topics in front of the whole world.
All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Many years ago, a very successful real estate developer in New York, known as Donald J. Trump, I bid on the renovation and rebuilding of this very United Nations complex. I remember it so well. I said at the time that I would do it for $500 million, rebuilding everything. It would be beautiful. I used to talk about, I'm going to give you marble floors. They're going to give you terrazzo. I'm going to give you the best of everything. You're going to have mahogany walls. They're going to give you plastic. But they decided to go in another direction. You walk on terrazzo. Do you notice that? And I'm really good at predicting things, you know. They actually said during the campaign they had a hat, the best-selling hat. Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything. And I'm telling you that if you don't get away from the green energy scam, your country is going to fail. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you. I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
That was just a sample of the hour of ramblings by our 79-year-old president today. Coming up next, Senator Mark Kelly joins me live on set. Don't go away. Today, Donald Trump addressed the UN General Assembly. His speech went on for almost an hour, nearly 4 times what he was allotted. And it was very familiar in many ways, just sort of like his free association riff stuff. It included a very shrewd audition for the Nobel Peace Prize.
I ended 7 wars, and in all cases, they were raging with countless thousands of people being killed. This includes Cambodia and Thailand, Kosovo and Serbia, the Congo and Rwanda, a vicious, violent war that was, Pakistan and India, Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia, and Armenia and Azerbaijan. Everyone says that I should get the Nobel Peace Prize for each one of these achievements. What I care about is not winning prizes, it's saving lives.
Senator Mark Kelly is a Democrat of Arizona. He serves on the Armed Services Committee. He's here in New York during this UN General Assembly week. He joins me on set. Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
I mean, at a certain point, you'll run out of adjectives to describe the rhetoric of the President of the United States, but your response to the speech today?
Well, he's adding more countries every day. Yes. Yeah, I think it's because, you know, he said before the election that he was going to end the war in Ukraine and Gaza on day one. Unrealistic. And it seems like he's insecure about this, not being able to accomplish what he promised. You know, I think folks have to just stop listening to him. I think that I feel really bad about having to say that. Or maybe we just give him the medal. Remember at the end of The Wizard of Oz?
He really wants one.
The end of The Wizard of Oz, the wizard gave the lion a medal I think that's the point.
I think if you could do a Truman Show Nobel Peace Prize sort of thing for him, he would be extremely excited about it. But that point you made, I mean, I want to ask you about these two conflicts. One is today he came out seeming to sort of oscillate back towards Ukraine, and maybe they can get all their territory back and now open again to sanctions. Now, again, people talk this 180, but part of the thing with him is this inconstancy means you never know if that, like, whether that's going to last. Where do you see our role in that conflict right now?
Well, I think we still need to support our ally, Ukraine, help them. You know, we used to give them. Now it's done through European nations, selling them the equipment they need to defend themselves. The war has changed dramatically. I sit on the Armed Services and the Intelligence Committee. In the beginning of that war was a lot of artillery, exchange of artillery fire. That's where some ground would be made or lost. That is now FPV, first-person drone warfare, which has really changed what ground combat looks like on, well, certainly in Europe. We have to continue to support them. It's also not realistic, you know, what the president said today. I think he even said something about maybe Ukraine would gain some Russian territory.
Yes, he said maybe they'll get past their borders.
Talk about a 180. You're talking about a 180, and then let's go, like, you know, 100 yards down the field. This war can end when it gets really uncomfortable for Putin, when he is affected financially. If we could stop the purchase of oil by China, India, Brazil, that adds up to a lot of revenue. There's legislation to do that. We could put more pressure on the Russians. It's interesting. I think the tariff rate on Russia right now is 10%.
Yeah.
Now, we don't buy a lot.
Yeah, there's not a lot of
stuff there, but just as a symbolic, you know, measure, we could raise the, you know, tariff on Russia, demonstrate that we are serious about this. Ultimately, I think it's going to be financial pressure on Putin, on his government, so he can't continue to fund this war machine. Putin has established himself as a war criminal. You know, I hope to one day see him in prison, you know, somewhere. Every day he is killing more innocent women, children, old people intentionally. And I have a meeting tomorrow with President Zelensky. You know, hopefully we get some news from him about the meeting he had, you know, with Donald Trump, and maybe we can move this thing in the right direction.
You mentioned the two wars he said he would end on day one, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, and Hamas and Gaza. The latter shows no signs of ending. There's including ex-hostages who were in New York this week advocating for some sort of diplomatic end. The Netanyahu government seems to be pretty clear they don't want that.
No.
And this will just go on. And then after that, maybe the voluntary exodus of 2 million Gazans after tens of thousands have been killed. European allies are saying they're going to recognize a Palestinian state as pressure. Should the U.S. do that as well?
You know, I have been supportive and still support a two-state solution to this. You're right about President or Prime Minister Netanyahu. He is not taking the necessary steps to see this come to some kind of conclusion. He's actually been making it harder. I've met with him a number of times, starting out a week after October 7th, but then on at least one more occasion. And, you know, he says things in private. It's different than he says in public. It's not consistent with the actions he's taking. And because of that, you know, women and children are dying. Kids are starving. We have to do more to support the humanitarian crisis that's going on. Just an hour ago, I was with Cindy McCain here in New York talking about the challenges that she faces.
She's been very outspoken, too. Yeah.
It is incredibly hard. She has the last, not in this conversation, but a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to her, and she says she has about 2 feeding stations. She needs 200. The Prime Minister says he's going to help her with that. They don't get the help they need to be able to feed more kids. But she's also dealing with fewer resources. Yeah. Her budget is down 40%, partly due to the cuts in USAID. We used to send the World Food Program more money. When we cut it, other countries started pulling back.
Well, and there was never a vote on that, and then there was a vote in a rescission package.
Right.
Which brings me to this question about a shutdown. The president set up a meeting with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer to talk about working out a government funding deal. He then canceled it and posted a screed that was sort of indistinguishable from like the UN's, like from all
Typical.
of them. Yeah. You know, a lot of people are looking at the Democrats and saying, like, how can you do a deal with this administration that's acting so lawlessly and so destructively towards the basic fabric of the republic, and also reserving the right to just not listen to what Congress tells them about appropriations?
It's a tough spot to be in. I've got to be perfectly honest with you about that. We could make a deal with him. He could renege on the deal. He could rescind more money. And this fight right now, this month, about this shutdown is over how much the American people are going to pay for their health care. That's all this is about. The president is saying no. We're trying to provide some help because their costs are going to skyrocket here this fall. If people get their health care on the Affordable Care Act exchange, those premiums are going up dramatically. Folks are going to get kicked off of Medicaid. You know, that's post 2026 probably, but you're going to start to see rural hospitals closing. We're fighting to keep those rural hospitals open, keep health care costs down. And the president of the United States is not only saying no, now he's saying he doesn't even want to discuss it. This is the guy who claims he wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. Master negotiator doesn't even want to have the meeting.
Senator Mark Kelly, it's great to have you here. Come back anytime. I wish we had more time, but I really appreciate talking to you.
Thank you.
Joining us now, Puck senior correspondent Dylan Byers, writer-at-large for the New York Times and the Sunday Magazine, Jim Ruttenberg, and Semaphore politics reporter Dave Weigel. Let us continue the conversation we were having yesterday, Dylan. And why don't you tell me what more you've learned since then about why Disney and Bob Iger decided to put Jimmy Kimmel back on the air?
Sure. A lot of this, frankly, had to do with the blowback and with the public pressure. This wasn't good for Disney's brand overall. It certainly wasn't good for the brand of Bob Iger, the Disney CEO. It had more or less become an untenable situation. I don't think Disney, the family values brand, wanted to become the face of, you know, the erosion, that moment, that slippery slope turned into a fast descending hill around issues like free speech. And so they're trying to thread the needle here, right? They're trying to keep the business running and stay within the relatively good graces of the FCC, as well as the station groups, Nexstar and Sinclair. But as you and I discussed yesterday, Katie, bringing Jimmy Kimmel back on the air does not make their problems go away. Both Nexstar and Sinclair are going to continue to preempt Jimmy Kimmel's show, so it will not be on ABC stations in about a quarter of this country. And as you laid out there, this is a campaign by the Trump administration to go after media organizations, to go after perceived enemies. And as a result of that, I don't see them dialing that down anytime soon. I don't think anyone does. And so this is a story that's going to continue to play out for a while longer.
You know, there's a portion of the soundbite we played at the top, and we put the words underneath it because it was hard to understand those tapes from so long ago, where Nixon says we're going to outlive our enemies. Obviously, neither one of them are alive any longer, but the idea that they'll be able to eventually push back against these institutions, successfully do so, that they saw as their political enemies, as they saw against them, well, it's coming to fruition now, Jim, with the Trump administration. The institutions withstood Nixon. The institutions are wobbling against Donald Trump.
Yeah, certainly. It really is. You could look at it as a continuation of what started under the Nixon White House, especially this FCC. You can't quite call it a move, right? Because the chairman of the FCC, Brendan Carr, just sort of dribbled out the idea that these stations that are affiliated with ABC have licenses, and the FCC oversees those licenses. But you really have to go back to Nixon, because what Nixon did after that conversation you played is they did toy with the idea of going after station licenses. They did threaten the licenses of the Washington Post company during Watergate in a way that made Captain Graham, the leader of the Post, the publisher, wonder about whether their coverage should carry forward. And so that's the last time we saw this. But as you noted, even in Nixon, the FCC chairman at the time, Dean Birch, wasn't willing to really go so far when there was the beginning of talk about station licenses. Now, Chairman Carr did say this week, well, we weren't really threatening the licenses, but everyone heard what they heard last week.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ted Cruz likened him to a mob boss in the way that he was talking about it. Dave, you wrote about how this reorders things, the politics of the FCC. Explain.
Yes, this emboldened a faction of Democrats who say that if they take power back, when they take power back, the next Democratic president should use the tools that Trump has set out for him, point his own FCC, and use it to break up large media companies. Their argument being that, well, Sinclair could do a lot of censorship with the stations it owns. If it only owned 2% of the nation's TV stations, it couldn't do very much censorship. That is not the majority argument of the party, but that's coming up because if you want to break the party into two factions, one of them is appealing to the norms, hoping that there's a way to recover what was changed under Donald Trump. The other one is saying there are these tools he's leaving behind. He's proved that the government can make life financially very difficult for universities, for law firms, for people who oppose him, that the president can't be sued, but they can. And it's not sure if the easy path that exists for Trump at the Supreme Court would exist for a different president. But that's the thinking going on among some Democrats right now is get through these 3 years and change, limit it to that if they can win the next election, but then use their powers to rethink how government works. It's a very early conversation, but it's a change from even January where the hope was maybe he could be stopped in court.
Well, is the telegraphing of that meant to signal something to the Republicans, to the party? Hey, be careful what you're doing?
That's what Cruz was responding to. Not that exactly, but Cruz was looking ahead. Cruz is still fairly young. He was on a Supreme Court shortlist in the first Trump term. He gets reelected to the Senate whenever he wants. He can imagine a future where liberals have this power because where do conservatives think they're responding to? They think they're responding to a de facto liberal bias in media, in academia, in the legal world, et cetera, and they have to reorder it. And Cruz looks down to a future where Democrats have this power and use it to reorder things again. So he's one of the only Republicans I saw who, well, a few more spoke out, but his comments were more about what would happen if the worm terms and we don't run these institutions anymore. Most Republicans are really comfortable, one, defending Trump, two, not really envisioning a world where this is not working, where Trump is not able to pull these levers where somebody else is.
Well, I mean, that raises a question of why they don't envision a world where Donald Trump is the one not raising those levers, but we can leave that aside for now. I want to talk a little bit more about how I ended it, which is who withstands this? How willing are they going to be to withstand whatever comes next? I'm going to read from your colleague Kim Masters' piece on the Iger decision, Dylan, and then I'll ask you that question. She says, of all the backlash this past week, perhaps the Eisner drive-by stung the most for Bob Iger. This is the old head of Disney. An old Disney hand told me that Iger loathes Eisner, who tortured and humiliated him in the CEO's succession process. But that doesn't mean Iger can just shake it off when Eisner calls him out. Eisner was a dominant figure associated with the resuscitation of Disney, which had been adrift before Eisner and his team took over in 1984. Eventually, Eisner's star faded, but he still has stature. I would guess particularly since Iger had to operate in his shadow for so long. So just to remind everybody, Michael Eisner came out on Twitter and said, where did our institutions go? Who's going to stand up to these bullies? I'm paraphrasing, but that was essentially what it was. So if you have, can you characterize this as Bob Iger taking a note from Michael Eisner and deciding to withstand the bully, to push back against the bully? Is this the first person that's going to do it?
Well, I don't know about that. And by the way, just bringing up the Eisner-Iger beef, you're really tempting my impulse to go on deep media insider baseball here, which I will avoid for the purposes of this conversation. What I would say is that certain institutions are better positioned to stand up, both by virtue of their own power or their own success, their own business models, and their limited exposure to the sort of pressure that they can get from the government, right? So I'm thinking about the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, both of whom are standing up to lawsuits in ways that Disney, ABC, Paramount, CBS have not. And I think this speaks to a sort of broader point where perhaps we can find some semblance of solace here. I know I'm on a TV network now, and I don't want to be the skunk at the garden party, but the future of satire, the future of news is not on broadcast television. And the FCC's power in that regard to police broadcast licenses or station groups like Nexstar and Sinclair to exert that sort of pressure, don't get me wrong, it's meaningful. And this is a very bad week for press freedom. But in the grand scheme of things, the future of media does not live on those platforms. And as such, that's going to be disseminated across YouTube, across social media, everywhere else. The thing that I worry about, Katie, do you have institutions that have the balance sheets and the power and the fortitude and the legal structure to stand up to pressure from the government? When you're looking at a future media landscape where you've got a lot of independent actors and startups and things like that, there is not as much of a moat there, I guess I would say, to deal with government pressure. And so that is going to be a concern going forward.
The reason I'm smiling is everything you're saying is absolutely true. And I know you're a bit of a skunk at the garden party, but I understand it. I can see the reality around us. But as you were just saying, and I think I'd like your thoughts on this as well, Jim, you know, there is an institution behind this network. There's an institution behind ABC. There is there's a legal department. There's a security department should people need it. There is money and there is power behind these places. And you might get a whole lot more freedom of speech on these smaller platforms. But you also have to wonder whether people will be comfortable doing the kind of reporting that comes from large institutions when they don't have the legal backing behind them. Do they go and print unclassified material or classified material? Do the Pentagon Papers get leaked and then printed in a world of Substack?
Well, I think those are great questions. And, you know, for everything we're talking about, and the changes in media are huge, the institutions excuse me, that are reporting the things that the Trump administration doesn't want reported, that are unearthing and doing the journalism, which is expensive, which has legal risks and needs defending, that's coming from these big institutions and smaller institutions, frankly, that aren't as well endowed, that have to really worry a bit more economically about threats from an administration. So that's a real concern. We don't know about the stories that aren't happening because people are pulling back. And I'd love to mention one thing, though, about the history of Eisner and Iger, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
And that is that sorry, but it's important to remember this. Let's not forget that Iger and Eisner were both in place when ABC removed Bill Maher, canceled his show in 2002 after a huge blow-up in 2001 when Bill Maher made some remarks about 9/11 that caused a lot of controversy and stern rebuke from the White House. And so Eisner was there then, and they definitely blinked. So there's always been this kind of pressure. But what's extraordinary now is that the Trump administration is bringing the full force, talking about station licenses and FCC regulatory power, which brings me to this last thought here. As the administration is flirting with this regulatory power against these older institutions, the online world that Dylan's talking about, they're doing everything to make sure that those big platforms do not moderate speech there. That's the speech they want, because algorithmically they have the advantage there.
What I appreciate from you guys, even though we're, old fuddy-duddies on television, is that we were able to have quite a nuanced and smart discussion with some historical perspective as well. So thank you for joining me in on this. I appreciate it. Gentlemen, appreciate it. Thank you again.
We begin tonight with a victory of sorts for free speech, as late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel returns to the airwaves in just a couple hours. Just days after Disney announced that he was suspended indefinitely, reports say Kimmel plans to address the controversy tonight in his opening monologue, his first public comments about the ordeal. Fellow late-night host Stephen Colbert was celebrating Kimmel's return.
Wonderful news for my dear friend Jimmy and his amazing staff. Once more, I am the only martyr in late night. Wait, unless... CBS, you want to announce anything? Still no? Right, because the money thing, I forgot. Yeah, the money thing. Right, yeah.
Colbert, also a frequent Trump critic, poking fun at his own demise. His show is in its final season. But this free speech crisis is far from over, as Trump allies and MAGA fans are furious over Jimmy Kimmel's return. The LA Times noting, quote, Disney wanted to be done with politics, but politics wasn't done with Disney. It never is. The backlash now coming from the right as Trump rages against anyone who criticizes him.
All they do is hit Trump. They're licensed. They're not allowed to do that. 97% of the stories are bad about a person. That's no longer free speech. They'll take a great story and they'll make it bad. See, I think that's really illegal.
Yeah, fact check, that's false. The ability to critique the government and the president is a constitutional guarantee. That's why it's the First Amendment. But the Constitution doesn't stop private companies from stepping in. Nexstar and Sinclair, who own dozens of ABC stations nationwide, have announced they will continue to preempt Kimmel, effectively blocking 1 in 5 Americans from hearing what he has to say when he returns tonight. This kind of corporate media consolidation can pose a risk, as companies seeking to curry favor with Trump can effectively censor what millions of Americans get to see and hear. The move to consolidate more apparent considering this. A host of MAGA-friendly billionaires already control various social media, cable, and broadcast news sources, and they're attempting to acquire more as they vie for administration approval to swallow up additional outlets. Joining me now to discuss is David Litt, former speechwriter for President Obama and author of It's Only Drowning, the true story of learning to surf and the search for common ground, and Tara Setmeyer, co-founder and CEO of the Seneca Project and author of Uncompromised on Substack. David, I'll start with you because the subtitle of your book is Attempting to Find Common Ground. That is a laudable goal. Most of us would like to seek common ground. But it seems like what we're seeing right now from this administration is shutting down any voices of opposition. What's your response just to finding out that Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air? Is that success for free speech, or is it just the market pushing back against the government?
Well, Jason and Tara, first of all, it's good to see you both. And to answer your question, I would say this is both of the things you described. This is a big win for free speech, and it's the market pushing back on Disney. Trump and the FCC thought that Disney would cave. They were right, but consumers didn't cave, and other celebrities and comedians didn't cave. And because of that, you see Kimmel back on the air. And so I do think you brought up this notion of common ground. I don't think that Donald Trump and I are going to find common ground on the meaning of the First Amendment because he doesn't understand what it says. But I do think that you saw a surprising amount of common ground on free speech. To his credit, which is something I never thought I'd say about Ted Cruz, Ted Cruz criticized the FCC's role here. So did Joe Rogan, Andrew Schultz. So it's not like you saw a groundswell of MAGA support for Jimmy Kimmel, but you did see some surprising bedfellows on this one.
Tara, one of the things that I think is concerning about the financial and political background of this is that Nexstar and Sinclair and a lot of these organizations are pushing the FCC to raise the cap, right? The current cap is any media company is never supposed to be able to get more than 39% of the U.S. population. They're hoping to move that to 80 or eliminate the cap entirely. What's the danger if companies like Sinclair or companies like Nexstar, what's the danger if they're able to just control as many affiliates as they want across the country to the American people?
Well, it's controlling the narrative. It's controlling the information that people consume. And that's the reason why we have antitrust laws against monopolies in all different sectors of our economy. And that's why the FCC exists. We need to understand something here, that, Sinclair is a Trump-supported company. So is Nexstar. They have a $6 billion merger that has to get approved by the FCC. So once again, Donald Trump and his MAGA minions that are in government, his lackeys that he's placed there, are doing exactly what he put them there to do, which is to weaponize government against his political opponents and to squash political dissent. I mean, Brendan Carr was an architect of the Project 2025 section about the FCC. So people need to, when we put this all in its totality and you see what you're doing, this attack against political dissent, against Trump's, perceived political opponents, It's all to control the flow of information and the propaganda and the lies that Donald Trump and MAGA perpetrate without pushback. Truth is under assault, as well as our free speech. And it's against a fundamental hallmark. James Madison is spinning in his grave.
Amongst other things, yes. David, I want to play you some sound from Jon Stewart last night when he was talking about Disney's monopoly, and get your thoughts on the other side.
Wasn't it interesting to try and figure out all the tentacles Disney has in your daily life? It's one thing to swear off cruises, but the Avengers? Nah. How is it possible that by getting rid of one company, I can't watch Winnie the Pooh or Monday Night Football? Or listen to early Hillary Duff?
David, one of the things that's most concerning to me about what we've seen over these last couple of weeks is that it's a reminder that I think both Republicans and Democrats have been at fault. We've seen 25 years of mergers and the lessening and breaking down of rules and laws. What do you think should be the Democrats' perspective going forward? Because as long as these oligarchs and media monopolies keep growing, we're going to see more of this. What should Democrats be saying right now?
Well, first of all, I would be saying, if anybody happens to be watching this and is a multi-billionaire who is a Democrat, buy some TV stations. I hear that's useful to spread your political agenda. But the other thing, and I think this is the more important point, is that you shouldn't have to do that in order to have free speech and debate and comedians allowed to criticize the president or make fun of the president. I think when you're looking at here is, and it's in media, but it's in all kinds of different areas, this consolidation. And to a large extent, Americans were okay with it because we didn't see some of the worst consequences coming to pass. So I think in a strange way, I don't think any of this is good, but I do think that it's the mask is off and the consequences, the effects of this consolidation, because ultimately this is not, these decisions are not being made by some corporate entity or even by a majority vote of some kind. It's just a couple of people. And the graphic you showed earlier, we could get to a place where it's just 4 or 5 people making the major decisions about what we can say and what we can hear. And that's a different kind of threat against free speech. It's not necessarily covered by the First Amendment in every case, but it's deeply antithetical to the spirit of the First Amendment, which is essential to the spirit of the country.
Tara, for a long time, we were sort of under the impression that these, even if they were conservative leaders of these media companies, they were primarily concerned about the market, right? The market pushed back. People were threatening to boycott Disney. They were ending their Disney Plus licenses. So the market is going to hold some of these ideologues back. But what we're seeing now is people willing to make decisions that aren't financially wise for ideological reasons. Elon Musk is willing to lose money just so that he can do a catch and kill on Twitter. You have things happening in other different kinds of networks that are ideologically not financially driven. Within the conservative movement, within Republicans, how can they fight back about this? Because these are not market forces operating here. This is ideology, and they were supposed to be the party of market forces.
Right. Well, there's a lot of things that Republicans are supposed to be the party of that they are no longer, which is why I'm not in it. And a lot of other people don't recognize today's Republican Party. This isn't Ronald Reagan's Republican Party anymore. And this is another example of that. The idea that capitalism should have been the answer to cancel culture, which is something that conservatives were very upset about years ago, and some could argue went too far in some areas. Okay, fine. But this boomerang effect here, now what they're doing, they're literally crossing the line into areas that are straight authoritarian. There's nothing democratic about this. There's nothing capitalist about this from the perspective of how Republican businesses and companies are handling this. The fact that it is so ideologically driven is, I think, what is more, which is different. That's what's different about the environment we're in now. And for some people, it's in apocalyptic holy war terms. So not even the Constitution is something that they will follow as their guide here, as the guardrail. So we have to really fight back against this, because there are more of us than there are of them. And the reaction by Disney to Jimmy Kimmel and reinstating him is a win for the American people. It is the righteous anger of the American people can push back against this. And this is an example of that. But it's just a battle. There is a larger war here that we're fighting, that everyone needs to wake up and recognize what we're up against here. You've got to know the enemy you're up against. And that's, I think, where we have to start and make sure that we're unified on it. We cannot let them get away with trying to gaslight us that somehow we're the problem.